البحر ويا منارة الجنوب.
Günter Schröder, welcome, and I'm happy to see you here, and I hope you will give us as much as possible information at the Eritrea today and the past story of Eritrea and the Horn of Africa. Would you like to introduce yourself, please, as firstly?
Yes, my name is Günter Schröder. I'm 74 years old. By training, I'm a historian and a social anthropologist. I have been following the events in the Horn of Africa since September 1965, and that is now more than 50 years. And I have been traveling and living in the region on and off. In the 1980s, I traveled with the EPLF. Altogether, I spent close to a year in the liberated areas in Eritrea, 3 months with the TPLF in Tigray, 3 months with the OLF in southeastern Sudan and western Ethiopia. After 91, I worked from 91 to 2000 in Ethiopia. During the time of the Eritrean Liberation Struggle, I gave many lectures, speeches, slide presentations on the Eritrean Liberation Struggle in Germany and all over Europe. But unfortunately, in 91, I was banned by the EPLF after it had won the war against the Ethiopian army. They did not like my assessment that they would not create a democratic state in Eritrea. I had supported the EPLF because I believed it's the only organization capable of defeating the Ethiopian army, but I had my serious doubts about their capacity and the will to build a democratic, free society in Eritrea. And when they were no longer in need of my propaganda as a value, they paid me back by banning me from Eritrea. In 95, I was allowed to visit Eritrea, but after 2 months after I had returned from Eritrea, I was again refused a visa for Asmara, because as one of my contacts in Asmara put it, I still had too much of my own independent opinion on matters in Eritrea. In 2000, the Ethiopian government deported me from Ethiopia for pro-OLF and pro-Eritrean attitudes, which rehabilitated me in the eyes of certain Eritrean officials, and I was allowed to visit Eritrea. In 2001, I was guest of state for the 10 years anniversary, and afterwards, from 2001 to 2009, I visited Eritrea several times. I had made a kind of agreement with certain officials that I can visit Eritrea, but I would not write anything about Eritrean politics under my own name. And in 2011, when I wanted to have a visa to attend the 20-year celebration, I was refused again entry to Eritrea, because some critical remarks I had made about the current situation in Eritrea were leaked to Eritrean officials from the consulate here, and naturally this information went to the Dehenet, Hagarawi Dehenet, and so a ban was again slapped down on me, and since that time I cannot visit Eritrea. But as I keep in contact with Eritrean matters, that is, I have a vast experience with Eritreans. In the 80s, I was working with Eritrean refugees in Germany, particular family reunification. I was working with a political organization. So I have a vast network within the Eritrean community all over the world, which also means I can get information about Eritrea, what happens inside Eritrea fairly easily. Much better than some of the few Europeans living in Asmara. Then after I was banned from Eritrea in 2012, I was allowed back to Ethiopia. So, and since that time, I frequently visit Ethiopia. I have contact with the Eritreans living there and the organizations, but also individual Eritreans living there, which also keep me updated about what is happening inside Eritrea.
Okay, coming back to the first issue, I mean the first part of your contact with Eritrea. How do you choose Eritrea? How do you choose Horn of Africa? What pushed you to come to East Africa? So can you please explain me what was the motivation of that?
Well, the reasons why some people get fixed on one area of the globe and other people get fixed on other areas, it is basically by chance. It's not a real conscious decision. In the early 60s, I had an interest in atypical anti-colonial struggles, where the colonizer against whom people struggled was not coming from overseas, but was a neighbor. There were several kind of these struggles: Nigeria, Biafra, North Sudan, South Sudan, the first Anyanya in Sudan. There were these kind of struggles in India, in Indonesia. And in '65 I read an article where reporting on the Eritrean struggle against the Ethiopian colonizer. I said, aha, another one of those. And I started to collect information on that. And from there it gradually built up. And over time it became, I got more and more deeply involved. And then particular when the monarchy in Ethiopia was toppled, and the war in Eritrea and the internal conflicts in Ethiopia heated up, it became more and more a center of my interest and activities. Then I started to collect information, and I published some readers on the struggles in Eritrea and Ethiopia. I collected materials, translated that into German and published that. And then when the international audience took a greater interest in the Horn of Africa, when the Mengistu government switched over to the Soviet Union and the Somali government switched over to the West, suddenly my books were in great demand and I was invited to give lectures. So it grew on me. It was not a deliberate design that I ended up being spending a lot of my professional work and time on the Horn of Africa, and making it a main area of my as a professional and also personal interest, but it simply developed following its own logic and dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Amazing! It's very interesting. I'm really I appreciate that actually. But how do you develop this knowledge about specialized in Eritrea and Ethiopia? And based on TPLF later on and EPLF, why not other organizations like ELF or and other parts of Ethiopian Liberation Fronts like Oromo and whatever?
No,
was it your?
You see, a lot of people who came to the solidarity movement with the Eritreans or the Tigrans or the Oromo, they came to these movements through personal contacts. With very little background knowledge. So, coming to these movements through personal contacts with little background knowledge, they basically came to believe unquestionable what these organizations said about themselves. All these organizations, they have their own version of history and their own form of self-representation. I came to these organizations in a different way. As I had a kind of problem, anti-colonial struggle against the neighbor, and I read up on that. I had been reading on these issues for a number of years before I got into the first contacts with, let's say, real Eritreans, real Tigray. So when they started to explain to me their version of history, their aims and goals, I already had a solid background against which to reflect what they said, and which gave me much more independence to evaluate what they say and to get a more objective picture than being simply a follower. Most of the people from the solidarity movement, they were uninformed followers.
Mm-hmm.
I became an informed critical friend of them. I supported them for various reasons, because I considered their issue to be just, in the case of Eritrea, in the case of Tigray, in the case of the Oromo, but not necessarily, I did not believe everything they said about their own perception of their own history, and also what they are going to do if they are victorious, which also in hindsight proved to be very beneficial. A lot of former friends of the Eritreans or the Tigrayans, they turned away from these movements after 91, when the situation in Eritrea or in Ethiopia did not develop like they had led to believe it would develop. A lot of former friends of these movements, they turned away from these, not only from these movements, but from the countries altogether, in disappointment that the reality which developed there after 91 did not conform to what they wished. And a lot of these people did not understand that it was their own fault. They had put hopes on these movements based on what the movement stated about themselves and their goals, which were unrealistic. Yeah? They expected these movements to produce better societies than they were able to produce in Europe or in America. So with my background, I did not have this as an exaggerated expectation and hopes for what would develop there. I knew there were limitations to what these movements could bring in terms of change, emancipation, and democracy. So, which also reduced, let's say, the level of disappointment I experienced after 91, and which enabled me to stay with these countries till today, despite their rather disappointing governments at one time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let me keep you on before independence of Eritrea. Before in the period between 65 and 91, and I know that you did a lot of studies according Eritrean Liberation Fronts, and you collect also many interviews. And can you please tell me what was the special interview which you did with some fighters at that time, which you can remember now?
Well, you see, I have always been a very curious person, and when I get engaged with something, I want to understand it properly. That also means I collect information as much as possible on various aspects. Mm-hmm. So when I get into contact, I develop the closer contact with the Eritrean organizations, not only the EPLF, but also the ELF, the ELF, PLF, and all other organizations afterwards. I started to interview early participants in the Eritrean Liberation Struggle. And over time, starting from 78 up to the present, I have collected about more than 1,500 pages of primary interviews with participants in the liberation struggle from various levels. Mm-hmm. And some of the more notable ones, I'm the only Western foreigner who ever did an interview with Idris Muhammad Adem.
Idris Muhammad Adem, okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I did a series of interviews with Usman Saleh Sabeh, mm-hmm. whom I greatly appreciated. In a certain sense, extremely conservative, politically wily and maybe even a rascal, but also on a personal and social level. On a social level conservative, but as in social interaction, friendly, communicative, and whatever his shortcomings might have been in later years, without his input into the Eritrean revolution in the 1960s, there would not have been an Eritrean revolution. That is quite clear.
So you are talking about Osman Saleh Sabe?
Yeah, Osman Saleh Sabe. I had several interviews with him, and whenever I came to Khartoum, we met, had a dinner or whatever, talked about for hours about all kind of things. I did a lot of interviews with Mohammed Said Naud, the founder of the Harakat. Also one person which was often underappreciated by Eritreans, supportive of the EPLF. I mean, Osman Saleh Sabe and Mohammed Said Naud, they did not have the same ideological orientation as the Isaias and the EPLF, but they were also great liberation strugglers. And they did, in the early years, they did a lot of very important and good things. Saleh Ahmed Yai and Jafar al-Assad. I did a whole series of interviews with Harbenya from the 60s, including the Abu Tiyara, a special friend of mine.
Abu Tiyara, okay.
I mean, these Eritrean Sudanese soldiers, they were also not very educated, socially conservative, but on a personal level, great persons. And they did a lot to promote the Eritrean liberation struggle in the early years, and for that they should always be fondly remembered. So I had a lot of interviews with them about the early history, and also, as I said, there are so many other interviews I did. So only ones where I have very few interviews are from the EPLF, because it was a policy of the EPLF during the struggle that none of the fighters would give interviews about their personal experiences. Some information after 91 I could collect, and I had made arrangements in 2008, when I was the last time in Eritrea, to conduct a series of these interviews with former high-ranking members of the EPLF, like Ramadan, Mohammed Noor, and others. But then I was banned again. So these interviews never materialized. And by now, those people I would have dearly liked to interview, most of them have passed away. Yeah.
Have you ever got a meeting before 91 with current president of Eritrea?
Well, I met him one time in 1980 in Sudan, in person. And, President Isaias is not the person given, he's not easily approachable in a sense, easily social communication. People like the Haile Menkerios or Sephat Ephraim, Ali Said Abdallah, with these people you could strike the easy communication. Yeah? They have social skills in a sense. But Isaias, he was always withdrawn, aloof, or some people would say even as arrogant. It's not easy to strike up some kind of interactive relationship. So I met him, we briefly talked about things. The questions I asked were not to his liking.
When was that?
In 1980.
Okay.
In November 1980, when he introduced the 7-point peace plan of the EPLF to the Sudanese authorities and the world. I had certain questions on these 7 points, and so, but he did not like that. But on the other hand, when some people within the top leadership of the EPLF did not want me to come to Eritrea in 88, There was a conference here in Eritrea. The Research and Information Center in Eritrea had invited for a second conference of scholars dealing with Eritrea, and some people did not want me to come there. He said that I should come there because I'm a friend of Eritrea and a known scholar in Eritrea, even if he is critical of us, but he should be there at this conference. Yeah. It was not necessarily the President Isaias who banned me from as a field or Eritrea. It was people one level below. Yeah. Mm-hmm. For example, in '91, it was the Amde Michael Kasai and Naiski Kiflu. They were the ones who were responsible for putting a ban on me.
Mm-hmm. Naiski Kiflu was not the security at that time, is it?
He was.
He was 91, okay.
In 91, he was responsible for in the Ministry of Interior for police or things like that.
Okay. And what was the responsibility of Amde Michael?
Amde Michael in the late 80s, he was a representative of the EPLF for Europe. Mm-hmm. And I had run afoul of him because he was a drinker and a womanizer.
Okay.
And at the Bologna meeting, he was chasing a Finnish colleague of mine, and I intervened and stopped him. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So he paid me back later. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, also in politics there are certain personal elements.
Great. Coming back to two things. You mentioned it. One is Idris Muhammad Adam. It's an important person. And the second one is Osman Saleh Sabeh, which is really, I agree with you, there is no interview with these two guys. So can you please explain me deeply how you get them and what was the outcome of these interviews?
I met Idris Muhammad Adam, I think in 1988 or 98 in Khartoum.
88 or 98?
88 or 98.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I met him in Khartoum. At that time, I was trying to locate participants from the early years of the struggle living in Khartoum. And one of my contacts mentioned, Idris Muhammad Adam is in town, do you want to meet him? I said, yes, I want to meet him. So, and then I was taken to a house in Khartoum Itnin, and he was sleeping there in the shadow of a tree on an angareb.
Angareb, yes. Okay.
And so my contact person, he woke him up and said, Said Idris, there is a friend of mine who wants to talk with you. And he was so surprised that he actually talked with me. And so I asked him things about the early years of the struggle, how he established the contacts in the Arab world and this and that. And obviously he was a bit impressed about my background knowledge, so I could come back the next day for a continuation of the interview, which according to my friend had never happened before. He had never given an interview to Westerner, only he
was impressed.
To Arabs,
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's only 8 pages, but it's still the only interview he ever did in this sense. And Osman Saleh Sabeh, I met when I was the first time in Khartoum, in 1980. I had a good friend of mine he was a Muslim Eritrean, also from the fighters, early fighters. I met. He was now working for a refugee organization. I met him there, and he helped me to locate in Khartoum as people from the olden days, and he introduced me to Osman Saleh Sabeh.
Mm-hmm.
So I was taken to his house near Sajana,
mm-hmm.
and he knocked on the door, and then somebody came, and my friend explained that there is a Khawaja who wants to talk with Usman. Then he came down, invited me friendly, Mohammed Said was there. We had a dinner. We were chatting and so on. And like next 2 or 3 years later, upon his invitation, I came back for a longer interview. So then every time I came to Khartoum, I contacted him. We met and we talked. And personally, my personal preference would be Osman Saleh Sabah should get a statue in Asmara, not Awate, because he did much more for the Eritrean liberation.
I agree with you. He did a lot of things, but even in the current time, nobody talk about Osman Saleh Sabah's great things which he did for Eritrea. Actually.
No, you see, is Awate. He came to the Eritrean revolution by coincidence. His going to the mountain was not part of any organized plan and activity. It was on the spur reaction to certain steps taken by the Ethiopian authorities to disarm his small armed followership. And the ELF at that time had no hand in it whatsoever in his going to the mountain. It took the ELF abroad several months to actually establish contact. A lot of former friends of these movements, they turned away from these, not only from these movements, but from the countries altogether, in disappointment that the reality which developed there after 91 did not conform to what they wished. And a lot of these people did not understand that it was their own fault. They had put hopes on these movements based on what the movement stated about themselves and their goals, which were unrealistic. They expected these movements to produce better societies than they were able to produce in Europe or in America. So with my background, I did not have this as an exaggerated expectation and hopes for what would develop there. I knew there were limitations to what these movements could bring in terms of change, emancipation, and democracy. So, which also reduced, let's say, the level of disappointment I experienced after 91, and which enabled me to stay with these countries till today, despite the rather disappointing governments at one time.
Let me keep you on before independence of Eritrea. Before in the period of between 65 and 91, and I know that you did a lot of studies according Eritrean Liberation Fronts, and you collect also many interviews. And can you please tell me what was the special interview which you did with some fighters that time, which you can remember now?
Well, you see, I have always been a very curious person, and when I get engaged with something, I want to understand it properly. That also means I collect information as much as possible on various aspects. So when I get into contact, I developed a closer contact with the Eritrean organizations, not only the EPLF, but also the ELF, the ELF, PLF, and a lot of former friends of these movements, they turned away from these, not only from these movements, but from the countries altogether, in disappointment that the reality which developed there after 91 did not conform to what they wished. And a lot of these people did not understand that it was their own fault. They had put hopes on these movements based on what the movement stated about themselves and their goals, which were unrealistic. They expected these movements to produce better societies than they were able to produce in Europe or in America. So with my background, I did not have this as an exaggerated expectation and hopes for what would develop there. I knew there were limitations to what these movements could bring in terms of change, emancipation, and democracy. So, which also reduced, let's say, the level of disappointment I experienced after 91, and which enabled me to stay with these countries till today, despite their rather disappointing governments at one time.
Let me keep you on before independence of Eritrea, before in the period between 65 and 91, and I know that you did a lot of studies according Eritrean Liberation Fronts, and you collect also many interviews. And can you please tell me what was the special interview which you did with some fighters that time, which you can remember now?
Well, you see, I have always been a very curious person, and when I get engaged with something, I want to understand it properly. That also means I collect information as much as possible on various aspects. Mm-hmm. So when I get into contact, I developed a closer contact with the Eritrean organizations, not only the EPLF but also the ELF, the ELF, PLF, and all. So celebrating this person as the founder of the Eritrean Revolution in the 1st September of 61 as the beginning of the Eritrean Revolution is actually, in my opinion, a misrepresentation of the Eritrean history. Mm-hmm. So proper date to celebrate would be the 2nd of November 1958, the foundation of the Harakat al-Tahrir al-Eritrea, because that was the foundation date of the first political organization of Eritreans dedicated to achieve Eritrean independence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When was that again? It was
2nd November 1958.
Mm-hmm. This is before 1961, okay.
Yeah, sure. 3 years before.
Harakat, yes. Okay, let's take on before independence of Eritrea 91, and my issue is there are special personalities which you are talking about, Osman Salih Sabah, and Idris Muhammad Adam and such others. What about Idris Muhammad Adam? What was his role, according to your interview, what he did in Eritrea, more than Osman Salih Sabah? Or less than Osman Salih Sabah, which was
It is Muhammad Adam. He belonged to the traditional political elite in Eritrea. Mm-hmm. He was one of the leaders of the Western Muslim League, which had broken away from the Muslim League of Ibrahim Sultan, mm-hmm. because they did not agree with the social reform program of the Muslim League. The traditional leaders of the Western Eritrean Muslims gathered in the Western Muslim League, in the Muslim League of Western Eritrea, and cooperated with the Ethiopian authorities in order to preserve their social privileges. And so for quite some time he went along with Eritrea being part of the Eritrean Ethiopian Federation. It was only after he was marginalized, after he himself fell victim to the Ethiopian machinations, that he became a latter-day Eritrean nationalist. And in 58, when was that? Was it 58? No, in 60. Yeah, in 58. Mm-hmm. In 58, he was smuggled out of Eritrea by Eritrean soldiers from Sudan, together with Ibrahim Sultan. Mm-hmm. And he did not see eye to eye with the Harakat. Being socially and politically conservative, he was mistrustful of the Harakat, led by young people who had links to the Communist Party of Sudan, and he considered the leader of the Harakat and the Harakat organization as such as being a sinful organization because of the left-wing program. So when he came to Egypt and met there the ELF under formation, he was co-opted by the young Eritreans establishing the ELF one has to understand several things about realities in the wider political context. Egypt was fighting against, under Nasser, was fighting against Baathists, was fighting against communists, trying to keep them under control. In Sudan, you had a powerful Sudanese Communist Party, you had powerful Baathists. So the Egyptian Mukhabarat, the secret service, monitored the political developments in Sudan, particularly the activities of the Sudanese communists. So the formation of an Eritrean organization led by two Eritreans who were also card-carrying members of the Sudanese Communist Party.
And that was Idris Muhammad Adam?
No, that was Mohammed Zaid Naud and Saleh Ahmed Yai. Yeah. So these two people had been members of the Sudanese Communist Party, coming from the trade union movement. So naturally the Egyptians had an interest in this organization. From their point of view, another communist influenced organization becoming active in Sudan and in Eritrea, all alarm bells were ringing. So they started their own counter moves. They gathered Eritrean nationalists living in Cairo. Since the 50s, a lot of Eritreans had moved to Cairo, again sent by Osman Saleh Sabeh to continue their education in Arabic. After 8th grade, it was not possible in Eritrea. So many studied at Al-Azhar University in high school first and at university. And then the Egyptian security, they picked one person, Said Hussein, a Saho, who had gone in the middle of the 50s to Cairo. He had, in 56, he had enrolled in the Egyptian army. He fought as a member of the Egyptian army against the Israeli, French, British forces attacking Egypt in the first Suez War, so to say. Afterwards, in early 58, after the Palestine Liberation Organization had been established in Egypt, he enrolled in the camps there, and he had for several months as a military training with the PLO in Egypt. And Said Hussein became the unspoken leader of this group of people whom the Mukhabarat wanted to create an Eritrean organization as a counterweight to the Harakat. So at the end of December 1959, they had the clandestine meeting on the Jebel Mokadam, which is a kind of picnic area outside the center of Cairo, where you could meet
secretly,
not secretly, openly, an innocent event of a picnic. So, and discuss politics. So there, the plans were formalized to create Eritrean Liberation Organization. And then the decision was taken to co-opt into this organization and in this leadership group, which led these efforts, it is Muhammad Adam. Because most of the younger members of this grouping actually didn't like Idris Muhammad Adam very much. But some of the more conservative elements had a certain, let's say, social affinity with this man, elderly, socially respected person, a kind of latter-day nationalist. He unsuspected of any radical leanings. And even the more radical elements in this core group, establishing the EPLF, they wanted him because they needed a presentable interface to the Arab world. They themselves, being youngsters and, let's say, tainted with certain ideologies, they could not easily approach the monarchs, the Arab monarchs. But Idris Muhammad Adam could. So When finally the ELF was announced in July 1960, Idris Muhammad Adam appeared as the leader of this grouping, and he was sent around the Arab world to pass a message on that there is a new Eritrean organization. And it was through Idris Muhammad Adam, when he visited Jeddah in the first half of 1960, even before the ELF was officially announced, that he recruited Osman Saleh Sabeh into the ELF. Osman Saleh Sabeh by that time had gone from Ethiopia to Saudi Arabia on his way to Pakistan, where he hoped to raise money to support a small NGO he had established in Ethiopia, the Eritrean Ethiopian Muslim Welfare Organization or something like that. He wanted to collect money for that abroad, but he got stuck in Saudi Arabia, and there Idris Muhammad Adam, he persuaded Osman Saleh Sabeh to dedicate his skills. He was known to Idris Muhammad Adam naturally as a former headmaster of the school in Ergigo, in the Hassan Takia school. And so Idris Muhammad Adam persuaded Osman Saleh Sabeh to join as the ELF. He was made for some time the representative of the Eritrean Somali Friendship Association in Somalia after the independence of Somalia in summer 1960. And at the end of 1960 he went to Cairo, and things developed from there onward. Yeah. So Idris Muhammad Adam, he was not a founding member of the ELF, but he was co-opted because he had a certain practical value for
in the ELF.
Yeah, for the promoters of the ELF. That's that. Yeah.
Have you ever been during this time before, let's say before 80-81, in the liberated area of part ELF? Do you ever have a contact with the ELF members?
Oh, well, I had contact with the ELF members and the EPLF members at the same time, as in 73 here in Germany. Yeah. Both were present.
Okay.
And I had always contact with both of them. Later, as I said, when the ELF PLF developed, emerged through a split from the EPLF and also some elements from the ELF in 1977, I had also contacts with them. See, that was one thing which my contacts with the EPLF never really liked, that I had also contacts to the others. They wanted their friends to be totally dedicated believers. But I told them, look, today you are against the ELF, PLF, you are against Osman Saleh Sabeh. If I become an enemy of them following your lead, maybe next year you are making your peace with them, you unite with them, and then I still would be saddled with the legacy of having the dealt hostile with them.
That's true.
Yeah. So I have my opinion about these organizations. I do not accept their policies as being correct, but I talk with them because after all they are around and they are people. But in 1980 I had a plan to visit the operational areas of the ELF, but then the civil war of 80-81 intervened, and the Sudanese authorities banned me, barred all foreigners from visiting Eritrea for some time, from August 1980 till November 80, the first round, when in November 80 the Sudanese authorities kind of enforced a ceasefire between EPLF and ELF along the banks of River Baka around Karkabet. So but by that time there was not much left of the operational area of the ELF, and it also was not considered to be safe for foreigners to go there. So the ELF itself did not want to take foreigners in.
In 80s, especially middle 80s until a couple years after 85, you have visited TPLF area and EPLF area, and that time was not convenient to pass from Tigray to Eritrea, and then you had, I heard, some troubles in this case. Can you?
Let's put it that way: the traveling throughout the 80s, traveling through Sudan to the liberated areas in Eritrea or in Tigray or Oromo held areas, OLF held areas, was always fraught with a certain element of difficulties. In 1980, I was cleared by the EPLF also to visit their areas. By the time we had also the permission of the Sudanese authorities, by the time we reached Port Sudan, my permission was withdrawn from Sudanese permission, but the German veterinary doctor accompanying me, she was allowed to enter because medical personnel was allowed to enter, all other persons not. Yeah. So she could travel there also for a couple of weeks. Also I was cooling my heels in Sudan, trying also to survive. Well, I had a very bad case of malaria at that time in Port Sudan, and but I couldn't cross. In 82, the EPLF smuggled me across the border into liberated Eritrea, past the Sudanese border controls. And a couple of months later, they smuggled me out again. And then when I arrived in Khartoum, the visa had expired, and I was given 1 week to leave Sudan. Put it simply, they kicked me out. But they didn't stamp my passport that I would not be allowed to re-enter. So 2 years later, no problem coming back. In 85, arrangements were made with EPLF and TPLF to visit their areas. That first, I would cross with the TPLF from Kassala through Eritrea, EPLF held area, to Tigray, and that at the end of my stay in Tigray, I would be handed over to the EPLF. Yeah, they would be informed ahead by the TPLF that I'm coming, so the EPLF could make the necessary arrangements, particularly assigning a facilitator to me, translator and facilitator, meaning a member of the Halawi Saura from the Kifle Senan propaganda. They were also members of Halawi Saura, as the same monitor.
So you passed from Eritrea?
No, I passed from Kassala through Eritrea to Tigray on the convoy of the TPLF.
And this was very dedicated time?
That was in 85, yeah.
Okay.
When, unknown to the outside world, but known to me, the TPLF and EPLF since 83 had growing problems. And but they were still talking with each other. While I was inside the Tigray, they had broken the relationship. And I myself had run into certain problems inside Tigray because I questioned certain policy issues of the TPLF. I raised the issue why actually it is necessary to dedicate a lot of the educated manpower to translate the works of Stalin and Lenin into Tigrinya, when at the same time they have to deal with a crisis of hunger migrants of epic proportions. And what is the benefit of having a Marxist-Leninist League of Tigray? But the main issue I had with them was they wanted to regulate for me and the other German friends of them, how to phrase the presentation of the Tigray issue to the German public. At that time, let's say, their public language was very ideological, full of, well, words which would not go down very well in the German public. They always talked about the Derg as fascist. Now, for the German public, the term fascism means something quite different.
Definitely, yes.
Than what the Derg did. Fascism in a European context has a very specific meaning. We tried to tell our Tigray friends from the TPLF that you cannot do that. They did not like that very much, that somebody was telling them. Also other issues. As we tried to tell them, look, however, in whichever language, ideological or otherwise, you approach your own people, it's your business. I might have my own opinion whether it's useful or not, but it's your business. How I approach my society in order to mobilize help for you is my business. You cannot tell me what to do. Yes, we can. I said, no, I'm not a member of your organization. As we are supporting you because out of our free will, yeah. So that created a certain level of tension
between you and TPLF.
Between me and TPLF.
Okay.
And also, when the time came for me to hand me over, my stay in Tigray was cut short, actually. Then I had to stay 2 weeks in Shiraro, cooling my heels.
Where again?
Shiraro.
And?
Cooling my heels.
Okay.
Waiting for 2 weeks. Basically, it was my understanding they would inform the EPLF that I'm coming, and the EPLF then would send word that I should be put on my way.
Hello, Asora. Okay.
No, well, as I said, I should send. And I didn't worry about that because I know it might take some time to bring somebody down there from Sahel to take care of me. After 2 weeks, one day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was told that now I should go. And they put me on a lorry. Then we went inside Eritrea from Shiraro to Shilalo. And about 1 kilometer outside of Shilalo, the lorry stopped and they told me to get down. I said, what? The driver said, I was instructed to drop you here. I said, I was told I will be handed over through the EPLF. The driver said, no, I have no information. I said, just to drop you here. So he basically kicked me out of this lorry. And I was standing there at 5 o'clock in the early evening, in the middle of nowhere in southwestern Eritrea, and nobody was expecting me. So I took the rucksack and my plastic shanta. I walked to the village which I saw on the horizon. There was a young guard, young EPLF soldier. He nearly got a heart attack. I mean, it's in 85, yeah. He's simply a white person, had no business to be there. Then I told him in as a broken Tigrinya that I'm a friend. He should take me to the office of the Mahabarediet.
Mahabarediet, okay.
He was so astonished that this Ferengi even talks Tigrinya. So he simply took me there. And there I met someone whom I knew from Sahel. And then for the next 3 weeks I had a merry time in southwestern Eritrea, unmonitored by Halawi Saura. Because there was no minder assigned to me. I could frequently travel with the fighters.
But because you came unexpected to
unexpected,
okay.
yeah. So they had no official minder, and I was traveling with the fighters from the different installations from one place to the other. And I had a jolly good time there. Then somebody came from up there. He was a little bit annoyed with me. I said, well, it's not my mistake that the TPLF drops me here.
They kick you away, actually.
Well, they simply got rid of me, washing their hands.
Nice story.
Well, when I came back to Germany, the representative of the TPLF in Germany, a couple of days later, we had a press conference, actually my friends and myself, who had the friends who had been with me but gone back to Germany earlier, and myself, we got together. We had a press conference on the situation in Tigray, the situation of the hunger and all these things. We described the situation and everything. A couple of days later, I got the invitation from the TPLF representative in Germany and Europe for a Gemgema.
Gemgema, okay.
Yeah. Then I told him, look, Tesfaye, we can go to the bar, you drink the beer, I drink my coca, and then we talk about my experience. You can tell me what I did wrong according to your organizations, and I can tell you why I think I didn't do anything wrong, or I might even admit that I do something wrong, but you can take your Gemgema and put it somewhere where the sun doesn't shine. I'm not a member of your organization, so no Gemgema for Günter. And then we did anyhow. 1 year later he was excluded from the TPLF because he had criticized also issues related to the Marxist-Leninist League of Tigray.
With whom did you discuss that time in Tigray, which would bring you in this conflict? What was who was there?
Well, various people, but these people are still alive, and I still have to interact with them.
Okay.
So no need to start name callings.
Okay.
When, with some of those people with whom I had this experience, later on we were laughing about that. Just recently I met, after nearly 40 years, the TPLF official in Chiraro who was minding me in Chiraro during my 2 weeks of waiting here. I met him, and he immediately recognized me even after 40 years, and I recognized him because he hadn't changed much, I hadn't changed much. We had a good laugh.
So, if you see in this at this time, your experience that time, was it very convenient for you, or you could say also very dangerous? Why you did that? If you imagine now?
Well, see, basically, I'm not a very adventurous person.
But it was adventure what you did.
Well, as I said, I'm not basically an adventurous person, and not a deliberate risk taker. However, I have one personality trait, which is insatiable curiosity. And it is my curiosity which brought me always into these situations. Yeah, I mean, let's say for a young German, as a 35 years, having a son, gallivanting around in Sudan, doing with his liberation movement, and then traveling in the liberated areas. That is not exactly the normal thing to do. Yeah. But it was my curiosity which put me there.
Yeah, but still, it was a bit risky also to visit Eritrea.
Well, you see, if I want to know something, I go to great lengths to get it.
We had the opportunity to meet with Günter Schröder, a German scholar and expert on Horn of Africa matters. He has been following the events in the Horn of Africa since September 1965. He has widely traveled the region, lived with the EPLF, TPLF and OLF in the 1980s, and supported their struggle against the Derg for Eritrean independence. From 1983 until 1991, he worked with Eritrean and Ethiopian refugees in Germany. After 1991 until 2000, he engaged in development-related activities in Ethiopia. In 2001, Schröder did research and developmental consultancies in Eritrea until 2008. Moreover, since 1978, he has been writing expert opinions for asylum cases of Eritrean and Ethiopian refugees. Furthermore, Schröder has published various books and articles on Horn of Africa and refugee issues. In addition, he has given numerous lectures on Eritrean and Ethiopian issues in many European countries, as in Germany and also in the USA. We had the pleasure of engaging in a long conversation with Schröder. We had the opportunity to grasp a glance of his broad knowledge in the matter of the long Eritrean liberation struggle, the Eritrean history in general, and other developments in the Horn of Africa. Finally, he gave an in-depth presentation on the Eritrean population, the National Service Program, and the Eritrean education system. The presentation is primarily based upon the evaluation of the sent data obtainable from official Eritrean sources, most of them not accessible in the public domain, and on additional information gathered from numerous Eritreans over the 2 decades in Eritrea, Ethiopia, Europe, and North America. We appreciate that Günter took the time to share his knowledge and insights with us for the benefit of the Eritrean community and anyone interested in Eritrea.